This is so absolutely not how I imagined it would happen. Which is great.
That's the best way.
Which is so good.
Well, they watch you,
Yeah. So
things like that.
it's a Midsummer Night's book launch do, and it's not actually midsummer, but it is, and it's not really night.
It is fine. No one even.
But it is a do. It will be much ado about nothing, probably. Yeah. Anyway, welcome one and all. Shall I tell you what's on the agenda? Yeah. Let's see. So if I can remember. Yeah, there's this. Well, it's a kind of couldn't resist it.
Some ground. Right.
Oh, look at that! Isn't that amazing? It looks like
the one on the chalice.
It's called Shakespeare's Holy Grail: The Ancient Secret Revealed. Volume 1, The Poisoned Chalice. So it kind of does exactly what it says on the tin. It's about the Holy Grail from Shakespeare's perspective, how he sees what the Holy Grail is, and how he has revealed to us what it really means, what it has really meant all these thousands of years, I guess, and more importantly, what it means to us now. And it's largely, how can I say, stuff that we haven't been told, that didn't make it into the Orthodox teaching, for all kinds of reasons, and it became deeply, deeply dangerous, heretical to even think about the stuff that Shakespeare has packed his plays with. So, although this is ancient wisdom, if this is your first time being introduced to it, it might seem very new and very strange, and it is, So I'm going to sort of do my best to take a thread through Macbeth. What you might need to do is change your viewing point, change the lens through which you see things. You consciously start to look at something from a very different perspective. So this perspective I'm going to suggest is that you see all of Shakespeare's plays as the story, an allegory of the rise and fall of Satan. Okay, just let that sink in. Let's imagine a world where there's no more sin, when no matter what you do, it's not a sin. Imagine a world where guilt is optional, a choice, where guilt serves no purpose. This is the world Shakespeare is telling us we already have. This is the world the Bible is telling us we already have. Given that we're now going to start to look at Macbeth as the story of how Satan came to power and how he was vanquished, the story starts in the beginning, in Genesis. And so we have now Shakespeare doesn't have any rules, so he'll travel, the plays will go through thousands of years of time with no chronology, and people will, out of the mouths of different people, all kinds of different wisdoms from different kind of levels of consciousness will come through. He doesn't have any rules. He'll use anybody to say something quite incredible. So we're going to start with the beginning of Macbeth, where Macbeth and Banquo, his friend, almost his brother, if you like, are returning victorious from a war. And on their way home, they meet these three witches. And the witches give them a prophecy. They tell Macbeth that he will be promoted, if you like, to the position of Thane of Cawdor, which at that moment was something so vast, so great, that it was impossible. So they just kind of poo-pooed it. But they also said, and you will be king. That was even more ridiculous in that sense. But at Banquo, they said, you will not be king, but you will be father to a line of kings. I was like, what? What does that mean? So this is kind of inscrutable beginning to the play. And then within a matter of seconds, a messenger comes and said, hail, Thane of Cawdor. And for whatever reason, there's a reason, Macbeth is suddenly promoted to this high-ranking position in Scotland. And of course, it gets him thinking, well, if I can get this, then maybe I can get the crown. So he writes a note to his wife, Lady Macbeth. Says, we'll be home soon, darling. And by the way, had this encounter with these 3 witches, 3 weird women, 3 weird sisters, who, the way I see them, they represent a kind of twisted, in shadow form of the Magi, the 3 wise men that came to the Epiphany. I realized the other day that a magus is actually a sorcerer. So these 3 women are definitely witches, sorcerers. So that kind of fits with that sort of delineation, that possibility. So he says to her that he tells in the letter what happened, that he's been given this prophecy that he could become king. By the time he gets home, Lady Macbeth is in some kind of, well, as I see it, some kind of satanic rapture. She has she's at the beginning of the play, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth would represent Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, innocent. And so the serpent does its work on Eve and seduces us. In a lot of the plays, Shakespeare is implying that the serpent actually rapes Eve. He seduces and rapes her, violates her completely. And he's also implying that the issue of Eve, the children of Eve, are actually his children. So Cain and Abel become the twins that make up our lower self, our personality. So when Macbeth arrives home, Lady Macbeth is in this rapture, this compulsion to get the crown, The only way they can get the crown is by murdering the king, and she crowbars him into committing to do this terrible deed, murder. When Shakespeare, when he's at his heretical greatest, obviously, what he says is, should somebody spot this, it has to be completely deniable. So it's got to look, it's got to be ambiguous. So there's no real proof of what I'm suggesting here. The only proof that I've got, the only thing that validates it for me, is that it's so consistent. There's so many of these sorts of examples over and over again that it accumulates into something that for me is incontrovertible. For example, as I said before, he's implying frequently that the serpent raped Eve in the beginning, and the issue of that intercourse is basically us, our lower self, our ego, personality. And this is how he puts it. He suggests it. Okay, so Lady Macbeth, before Satan comes home, before Macbeth comes home, she's read the letter, and she's in this rapture, and she prays to Satan. And this is one example of how she prays to Satan. to enter her, to become, so that he would become her, or she would become him. She says, "Come, thick night, and pall thee in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, hold. So come, thick night." I mean, okay, sort of, there's an eroticness about that. Come, thick night. Night is biblical code that Shakespeare also uses for Lucifer. In the beginning, in the creation story, God created day and night. Day is the name of God, the true name of God, and night is the name of Lucifer, the shadow. Okay, so this is what Shakespeare is employing, this day and night thing. He's talking about God and Satan. Most of the time. So he says, "Come, thick night, and pall thee in the dunnest smoke of hell." So she's praying to Satan. And then she says again, "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. Unsex me." Now, today's modern playwrights, for children's TV, would say, "Fuck me, come, fuck me." But Shakespeare obviously couldn't say that, and he could if he he could, but he didn't. He had to hide it in its opposite. Unsex me. What's that mean? Unsex me. He's made up some thing that would justify it. But if you put this in the context of the other women in great heroines, innocents in Shakespeare's plays, like Lucretia, like Lavinia, like Isabella, these his innocents, Desdemona, that become violated, murdered, or raped. He's trying to make a point here that's in a very forceful way. Obviously, it's all metaphor, and that's how he does it at the beginning of Macbeth. This is Shakespeare's Genesis, if you like. The serpent violated, raped Eve, and inseminated her. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge, in the biblical sense, means to know someone, intimately. It's kind of infamous. So the knowledge of good and evil is the intimate experience of good and evil, which is Satan. And you eat of the fruit of that at your peril, because you're done. You're poisoned. You're contaminated forever. Forever. That's the point. Okay. Unless walking around before he commits the murder, he's walking around the grounds of the castle, Dunsinane Castle, and he gives this wonderful speech that is a foreshadowing, is his foreshadowing what's going to happen, what the consequences are going to be of his actions. He can see what's going to take place. I'm not going to do the whole speech, but there are a couple of lines that are germane to this particular thread. The first one he says, which is the beginning of the speech, is it's a real tongue twister. He says, "If 'twere done, when 'tis done, 'twere well 'twere done quickly." Okay? If 'twere done, when 'tis done, 'twere well 'twere done quickly. Okay? Emphasis on the word quickly. What's he talking about? Okay. We're going to come back to that. And then the next thing he says that appertains to the Grail is, he says, "This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of poison chalice to our own lips." And when he refers to the even-handed justice, he's talking about the Mosaic law. and the scripture, which says the only way Satan can be defeated is if he's hoisted by his own petard. If he does something that brings himself down. So Macbeth is kind of being the narrator there. But he brings up the idea of the poisoned chalice. So is this the chalice of the Grail that he's talking about here? And if it is the chalice of the Grail, why would the ingredients be poison? And to whom would they be poison? So those are the questions that arise there. So with that in mind, he continues his sort of stroll around the grounds, and he runs into Banquo, his friend, companion, his very close friend. And Banquo, he has a very short interchange with Banquo, and Banquo hands him a diamond. He said, "This is a diamond that is from the king that you're about to murder." He doesn't know that. For you to give to Lady Macbeth. So he gives him this diamond. And a diamond is a very powerful symbol, And in the kind of teaching that I have, it would be a symbol for the soul, purity and the majesty of the soul. So why is Banquo giving this to Macbeth? When you step back, you can see that Macbeth is the traitor, the betrayer. He's about to betray the king. And if you go back to the scene in the Last Supper, where Jesus says to the disciples, "The one to whom I give this sop, which is bread dipped in wine, will betray me." So he dips the bread in the wine, he gives it to Judas. And he says to Judas, "Listen, this is the key thing. That thou doest, do quickly." Right? And then it says, "And after the sop, Satan enters into him." It's like, okay, so you assume Satan enters into Judas. But why would it say that? Because it's already said that a couple of verses ahead of time. Satan entered into Judas when he committed to the betrayal, when he took the 30 pieces of silver. So I'm convinced now that Shakespeare is telling us that Satan entered into Jesus. So Jesus took the energy field of Satan into his consciousness, and he took it from the Last Supper to Gethsemane, where he did the famous prayer when he was sweating blood. He was arrested. He took it to the trial. And in fact, Satan was inside him when he was mocked at the trial. And most important, when he was crucified and died. Because when he died, he took the sin of the world, which is Satan. It's another term for Satan. Satan died. Metaphorically, obviously. These are all metaphors. So, because the Christ in him resurrected, but the earthly ego, lower side that was completely controlled by, what we call Satan, died at that moment. And it's like, that's quite a thing to come out with, it's quite a heretical statement. And it's like, how can we validate that? And so if you look at Shakespeare, there's a couple of further scenes that you get to in the play. The first scene that's relevant to this is after they've committed the murder, and the murder is discovered the next morning by Macduff. Macbeth, playing innocent, is telling the sons of Duncan that he's just murdered He's telling them what's happened and telling them the consequences of what's happened.
Who's Duncan?
Duncan is the king that he's just murdered. Yeah. Pay attention.
You didn't say he was called Duncan. You just called him the king before.
Oh, I apologise. Yeah, the king, Duncan.
My
Yes.
jump, actually. Would you mind if I just get my jump?
No, go ahead.
Sorry,
You'll
I don't want
miss
you to lose your
the
thread.
juicy bits.
No, take it.
I'm not going to wait for you because I will lose my friend. So, so when he tells the sons of Duncan, who are Malcolm and Donald Bain, what's happened, he says, renown and grace. I mean, he's obviously, you know, as a character, he's absolutely thrown by the consequences of his action. So he's saying, renown, it's like in a panic, renown and grace are dead. Renown and grace? It's the soul, it's God. God is dead. He said the spring, the head, the fountain of your royal blood is stopped. The very source of it is stopped. So the royal blood is the Saint Grail. It's the French term for Saint Grail, which means royal blood, Saint Grail. It's the term from which the Grail is said to have derived, you know, the sort of etymologically. So he's talking about something to do with the Grail in relation to the murder of the king. He's talking about the royal blood is stopped. So when you go on a quest for the Holy Grail, should you decide to do so, at any point, you might start by saying, well, what is the Grail? If I'm going to go and find this thing, what is it? But if you do that, you're going to get lost in the mists of Avalon because there's so many possible answers to that. And if you Google what is the Grail, you get millions and millions of hits. So if you say, rather than what is it, if you look at the legend, it's about something of priceless value that was lost and is very difficult to find. It's like, okay, so what was lost? What have we, humanity, what have we lost that's hard to find, that's extremely valuable? And there he is, screaming at us. The royal blood is stopped. And if you look in Genesis, of the story of Adam and Eve, this becomes that when they were banished, the tree of life was cut off. So what we have lost is the tree of life, or access to the tree of life. And if you fast forward to the end of Revelation, you'll see that the whole of the Bible, I mean, you don't need to read more than 2 verses in the Bible to get the whole thing. It's like, in the beginning, the tree of life was cut off. In the end, the tree of life, the access to the tree of life was opened up again for all mankind. So that's kind of the 2 ends of the story. And obviously, quite a bit went on in the middle. But so I thought, when I started writing this, I thought that was the Grail. I thought that the tree of life was the Grail. So the question, well, what's the tree of life? And if you kind of circle around, it becomes, well, I say obvious. It became obvious to me, and this is my perspective on it. That the tree of life is one of many symbolic representations of what's called the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. It's the Word, the sound, the name of God, the vibration. The vibration. That's the word I was going for. Yeah, exactly. The vibration of everything, the vibration of the universe, the vibration out of which we are made, we are manifest. So that's what Shakespeare is pointing to at this part of the play, that this was what was cut off by the original act of if you like, the contamination of mankind, or the intercourse of mankind with the with the serpent and with Satan. That action cut off the tree of life. It cut off the awareness inside us that we are divine and that we're one with God and one with each other. That whole thing of what the soul really is and what the experience of the soul is and can be has been cut off. So the question is now, how was that re-established? And how does Shakespeare talk about how that was re-established? Well, let's confirm something. After that scene with the sons of the king, he's crowned king, and the next problem he's got to deal with is the Banquo problem. Okay, because he's starting to get really anxious that the prophecy for Banquo is going to come true, and Banquo will usurp him, and the descendants of Banquo will take his crown. So what is he going to do about Banquo? He has him murdered, obviously. I mean, that's the solution. You get rid of the guy. So he gets rid of Banquo, and he resurrects at Macbeth's supper, which turns out to be his last supper. So at the supper that he's go away. Sorry, garden food. So you've got a motif, if you like, of the death, the murder, and the resurrection of someone who is prophesied to be the father to a line of kings, which is obviously there's a lineage going on there. Oh yeah, so he's fretting, he's kvetching about what is going to happen to him if Banquo comes to power. And he says something before he decides to murder him. He says a couple of things. He says, "Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and a barren scepter in my grip." So now you've got the archetype of Satan talking about wearing the crown of thorns and holding the wooden scepter that was given to Jesus at the trial. So it's confirming that Shakespeare is saying that it wasn't Jesus that was being mocked, it was Satan that was being mocked, because that was part of the prophecy, the even-handed justice, which is the hundreds and hundreds, over 400 prophecies throughout the Old Testament about how what the Messiah would have to do in order to vanquish Satan. And this is one of the many that were prophesied. So you've got this imagery of Macbeth wearing the crown of thorns and the barren scepter, and then he says, brings back the diamond. He says, "And mine eternal jewel I have given to the common enemy of man." He's lamenting. He's saying, "What have I done?" So he gets rid of Banquo. Banquo resurrects, and he goes crazy, absolutely has a complete fit about that, as you would, I mean, you go to all that trouble of murdering somebody, and they turn up at your dinner party as a ghost, and you're the only one that can see him, So what does he do? He goes to see the witches again, and he demands that they tell him what the fuck is going on here. What am I going to do? And of course, they have been waiting for it. And they've cooked up this cauldron, especially for him, and they're going to use the cauldron to give him his prophecies. And so Shakespeare is now he's invoked the idea of the poisoned chalice, the chalice of the Grail, which is the sacred object in the orthodoxy, and he's now converted it into a cauldron, and it's the ingredients in the cauldron that are now that are the poison. The first line of the witch's brew is, "Round and round the cauldron go, in the poisoned entrails throw." So he's confirming that the cauldron is the poison chalice. So two of the main things they throw in, or three, let's have three. One is the adder's fork goes in, which is the forked tongue of the adder, the good and evil, the satanic influence consciousness. And then the lever of blaspheming Jew goes in with a big plop. So who's the blaspheming Jew? I know it's me, but back in the day, it was Jesus. He was tried and executed for blasphemy and heresy, sacrilege, the whole thing. Ostensibly, on the surface, that's what it looked like. That's why, the Sanhedrin. Pardon? Well, he didn't deny that he was the Son of God. Yeah, they didn't like that much either. Yeah, so, but that was all part of the plan.
What's the third thing?
Pardon? Yeah. Oh, he's keeping count. Yeah, the third thing, which is
I have lived.
no. Well, that's another thing. If you remember the Greek, the one I like the best is finger of birth strangled babe, ditch delivered by a drab, makes the gruel thick and slab. Okay, gruel is porridge. They're not making porridge. They're not making porridge. It's a pun. Makes the grail thick and slab. He's telling us. He's busting a gut to tell us that he's talking about the grail. The grail as the ingredients in the cauldron, which relate to the ingredients in the chalice, the blood, and the body. And here's the cool thing about the cauldron. It's not so much that what goes in; it's what comes out of the cauldron. There's a kind of dark epiphany. The cool thing about Shakespeare's epiphanies, he usually nearly always has some kind of allusion to the epiphany in his plays. Most notably, of course, is Twelfth Night, which is the epiphany. But the point he's making is that at the epiphany, the body of Jesus was placed in a manger, literally, physically placed in the manger. A manger is what? It's a vessel for food. Manger is French, to eat, and it's where you put food for animals in it. And Jesus was laid in the manger and shown to the shepherds and the magi. At the Last Supper, which this foreshadows, the bread was symbolized the body of Christ that was placed into the vessel, which was the chalice. Okay, it was placed symbolically into the chalice, and again here in the chalice is now being represented. The manger, the chalice, is now being represented by the cauldron, and what comes out of the cauldron is one of Shakespeare's probably most deviously dark epiphanies. Let's just take a bit more of a look at this. Out of the steam and bubbles, and there's this apparition of a little boy, a baby boy, wearing a crown, holding a branch, and he gives these prophecies to Macbeth. One of which is, beware the Thane of Fife, which is Macduff. And then they say, but none of woman born can harm Macbeth. It's just a little boy saying that. So he thinks, beware Macduff, but none of woman born can harm him. So I've got nothing to worry about as far as Macduff is concerned, but I'll get rid of him anyway, just to be on the safe side. And by which time Macbeth has fled to England, so he can't get rid of Macduff. So he slaughters the innocent children and wife of Macbeth, which is the slaughter of the innocents. Macduff, yes, thank you. I get me Max all confused. That's another biblical motif, the slaughter of the innocents. And the other prophecy is that Macbeth shall never vanquished be till Birnam Wood goes to High Dunsinane Hill. So Macbeth's thinking, Birnam Wood, that's what, 100 miles away from Dunsinane. No chance that the trees are going to uproot themselves and march up the hill. So I'm safe. Everything's cool. So he's kind of he feels he's sitting pretty. But of course, as we know, if you know the story, moving on to the final scene where Malcolm and the armies that he's collected, the 10,000 soldiers, as they come up from England towards Dunsinane, they go through Burnham Wood, and Malcolm says to them, "I noticed this in the shower just a couple of hours ago. That there's this really, really cool thing in this." He said, "Have every soldier hew himself a bough and bear it before him." Hew himself a bough and bear it before him. So this thing of the soldiers cutting down the boughs and carrying them, I can see you've got it. Yeah, it's the bearing of the cross to Calvary, which again was something prophesied. So I've gone all shivery here. So he's used the word hew himself a bough. Hew, you probably know this, but I'll remind you, hew is the ancient Sanskrit word and name and sound of God. It's a sacred sound and name of God. Hew, yeah, and variations on it. Yeah, you're familiar with that. Yeah. So Shakespeare uses this as a pun whenever he gets the chance, and he's using it here. And the cool thing is that his mission is to, the tree of life has been cut off. So what do you think is the symbolism, of Shakespeare taking the boughs, the trees, on their shoulders up the hill, but even deeper, the symbolism of Jesus bearing the cross up the hill? What do you think the symbolism of that could be in relation to what needs to happen? The boughs of the tree of life. This is what it symbolizes: the re-establishment, the planting of the tree of life in the kingdom that Satan has usurped in consciousness. This is symbolized by the sort of story of the Via Dolorosa, and Shakespeare has adapted it as the taking of Burnham Wood up to Dunsinane. So when they get to Dunsinane, there's the final confrontation, and Seward, the English king, who's an interesting character, he sacrifices his son at the end to Macbeth. He kills his son, and then Macduff comes forward, and Macbeth is very gung-ho about Macduff and says, you can do what you like, but I'm invulnerable to anybody, that's born of woman. And he said, well, maybe you didn't realize, but I was from my mother's womb untimely ripped. And this is an allusion to the virgin birth, because that's the prophecy was that the Messiah, the one that would defeat Satan, would have to be born of a virgin, which again is doesn't happen that often. Once every couple of thousand years, perhaps. So that's the that's kind of the end of the story of Macbeth. And Macduff comes back onto the stage. It's in the text. It's not usually portrayed this way. With Macbeth's head on a pike or on the end of his sword or something. He's cut off the head of the serpent. The head, the source. This is the symbol. And Seward said, "Well, here comes new comfort." So he's bringing in the comforter. Everything is in there in little bits and pieces in the play. But what does it mean if Satan's dead? What does it mean if Satan has actually lived, if he died on the cross? What does it mean to us? I mean, there's a theological meaning, and then there's a kind of a practical, spiritual meaning. There is no sin. What is a sin? A sin, the original meaning of sin, it means to cut yourself off from God inside, cut yourself off from the spirit. And there's things that we can do that automatically have that as a consequence. But the point he's making is that I think, okay, is that if there is no more sin, if the sin has been taken out of the equation in the world, we are in effect already completely forgiven.
That's why.
We have free choice. We have free choice, so we can recreate that. We can bind ourselves to the Mosaic law that Jesus annulled. All the laws of the Old Testament are annulled, fulfilled. It says so in the Bible. Leviticus was written, that the law, Mosaic law, was written not so that it should be kept, but so that it was impossible to keep, so that everybody will be bound by guilt, because you can't get through the gate, the eye of the needle, into the kingdom if you're carrying the burden of guilt. You've got to, and that's what Macbeth says. And this is what I want to finish with, is that we're here, our purpose here, we've been forgiven. We've got to learn, how can we forgive ourselves? How can we let go of guilt? And how can we let go of resentment towards others, which is the same thing in reverse? And Macbeth has the most beautiful scene where he, I mean, if this had been noticed in the day, then he'd have been toast. He says his wife, Lady Macbeth, is dying of guilt. Okay, he knows it. The doctor knows it, and he says to the doctor, "Canst thou not minister to a mind diseased? Pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow, raise out the written troubles of the brain, and with some sweet, oblivious antidote, cleanse the stuffed bosom of that perilous stuff that dwells upon the heart." And the doctor says to him, "Therein the patient must minister to himself." Mm-hmm. So no one can forgive us except ourselves. Not even God, because he hasn't judged us. So there endeth the launch.